My aunt smirked and said, "Everyone knows Grandma chose my daughter over you. Stop fighting it." I threw the original will across the table and snapped, "Open the last envelope. You hid it because it destroys every lie you told." The worst part was that she said it in front of everybody, like she was announcing the weather instead of trying to bury me alive in my own family. We were in Grandma Helen's dining room 2 days after the funeral, sitting around the table that had hosted every birthday, every Thanksgiving, and every awkward family dinner I could remember. The curtains were still half drawn. The house still smelled faintly like flowers, coffee, and the hospital lotion she used at the end. My Aunt Marlene had that look on her face that I had always hated. It was the look of someone who had already decided she was right and was enjoying the fact that everyone else would have to catch up. Her daughter Chloe sat beside her with her arms folded, staring at the table like she wished she could disappear into it. My Uncle Ray was there too, technically my mom's ex-husband and not even blood to most of them, but he had been around long enough that nobody questioned his presence. My cousin Lee had come because she had been helping clean out the kitchen. And then there was me, tired, unshaven, and still wearing the black shirt I had worn to the funeral because I had not had the energy to think beyond that. Marlene had brought a thick folder. She set it down like she was placing evidence in court. She had already spent the last 20 minutes talking over people, correcting details nobody asked for, and acting like she was managing the entire estate. When she finally leaned back in her chair and smirked, I knew she was about to land the blow she had been waiting to deliver since the day Grandma died. She told me with that awful calm voice people use when they want to sound merciful that everybody knew Grandma had chosen Chloe over me. She said I needed to stop making this into a fight. She said I was only embarrassing myself. She said Grandma had been clear for years. I remember staring at her and thinking that she sounded less like a grieving daughter and more like someone reading from a script she had rehearsed in the car. I also remember realizing, very slowly, that she did not actually know what was in the house. She knew what she had managed to find. That was different. For a second, I almost answered her the way she wanted. I almost argued. I almost said that Grandma had not spent the last 3 years with her, had not eaten her meals with her, had not watched her medicine, had not sat through the endless doctor visits and insurance nonsense and pharmacy runs. But the thing about grief is that it makes your mouth feel too full and too dry at the same time. I did not trust myself to speak yet, so I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket and pulled out the original will. Marlene's eyes flicked to it immediately. That tiny movement told me more than anything she had said. I threw the folded pages across the table. The papers skidded and slapped against her folder. Then I told her to open the last envelope. I told her she had hidden it because it destroyed every lie she had told. Nobody moved. The house got very quiet except for the refrigerator humming in the kitchen. Marlene's expression changed just a little. Not enough for most people to notice. Enough for me. Enough to know I had touched something real. Before I explain what was in that envelope, I need to explain how we got to that table in the first place. Because if I had told this story a year earlier, I would have sounded paranoid. I would have sounded like the kind of guy who thinks every bad family dinner is secretly a conspiracy. That was not me. I was the practical one, the one who paid bills on time, the one who remembered medicine doses, the one who kept a folder of receipts because I got tired of digging through drawer junk when I needed proof of something. I never thought I would need that habit to defend myself against my own aunt. Grandma Helen was the person who actually raised me after my mom died. My mother's death changed the whole shape of our family. I was 14 then. Marlene was already grown and had Chloe. She and Grandma never got along the way people do when they have too much history and too many disappointments. Marlene always said Grandma played favorites. Grandma always said Marlene mistook attention for love. Neither of them ever apologized for anything. When my mom died, Grandma took me in without a long discussion. I lived with her through high school, through community college, through my first real job, and into the years when everybody else started treating her age like a problem to manage. She was never an easy woman, but she was fair. If she promised something, she kept it. If she was angry, she said it plainly. If she loved you, you knew it because she did things. She made soup when you were sick. She handed you cash without asking for a speech. She kept your favorite cereal on the top shelf and remembered how you took your coffee. Marlene always acted like Grandma's kindness was some kind of manipulation. The truth was more ordinary. Grandma was direct. Marlene hated directness whenever it did not give her what she wanted. Chloe was different from me in every obvious way. She was prettier, more polished, and better at sounding confident even when she was not. She could walk into a room and seem like she belonged there. People loved that. Grandma loved her too in her own way, but not the way Marlene claimed. Chloe was the grandchild who got invited to brunch. I was the one who got called when a pipe burst or an account statement looked wrong. For most of my life, that was just how things were. I did not resent Chloe for it. I resented the fact that Marlene made everything into a scoreboard. The first warning sign came 2 years before Grandma died. She had started forgetting little things, the kind of things that could be written off as age if you wanted them to be. A bill got paid twice. A check disappeared from the kitchen drawer. She swore she had left her hearing aid on the nightstand, then found it in the freezer. At first, everybody laughed about it. Then she fell in the bathroom and ended up in urgent care with a bruised hip. That was when I started staying over more often. I had a job that let me work from home half the week, so I shifted my schedule around and told Grandma I was just keeping her company. The truth was I was scared she would try to hide things from me if I made it sound too serious. Marlene showed up more after the fall, which I should have trusted less than I did. She brought groceries sometimes. She took pictures with her phone. She acted concerned in front of other relatives. She also started asking very specific questions about the house, the checking account, the deed, and the old filing cabinet in Grandma's bedroom. At the time, I thought she was just being nosy in the ordinary family way. Later, I understood she was measuring the furniture in a burning room. Grandma had a strong streak of stubbornness. If she thought someone was trying to manage her, she would turn difficult just to prove a point. So when Marlene started hovering around her finances, Grandma got sharper. She put me on bank call lists. She made me help her sort old papers. She opened a separate folder for medical records and another for estate documents. That was the first time I saw her original will. It was old and plain and made sense. The house would eventually be sold. The proceeds would be divided between me and Chloe after debts were paid. A few sentimental items would go to each of us separately. The rest was to be handled by an attorney she trusted. There was no drama in it, just a boring, sensible plan. I remember Marlene being furious when she found out Grandma had shown me that paperwork. She did not say it directly. She never said anything directly when she wanted plausible deniability. She just started making comments about how people with no children of their own cling too hard to the ones who are available. Grandma heard it. She never forgot it. The house got harder to manage after that. Grandma's health dipped in a way that was not dramatic enough to be obvious and not gentle enough to ignore. She had good days and bad days. On good days, she would make me sit at the kitchen table while she criticized my grocery choices. On bad days, she would pretend she was fine while holding the wall to get to the bathroom. I learned how to order prescriptions. I learned how to speak to insurance people without losing my temper. I learned how to time meals around medications and how to cut pills when the doctor said it was okay. I learned that caregiving is mostly paperwork, timing, and fear. Marlene learned how to show up when other people were watching. That became the pattern. When the hospice nurse first came to the house, Marlene arrived with a casserole and a sad face so practiced it should have been inscribed on a plaque. She stayed long enough for the nurse to see her. She left before the hard parts started. I handled the hard parts, the oxygen tank, the morphine schedule, the spilled cups of water, the constant calls from relatives asking if there was anything they could do, which mostly meant they hoped I would say no so they could feel helpful for 30 seconds. Grandma knew what Marlene was doing, but she also knew arguing about it would only make her stronger. So instead, she started doing what she always did when she wanted to protect herself. She prepared. I found out about the envelopes by accident. Grandma had a habit of hiding important things in places that felt too stupid to be true. Behind canned soup, inside flower boxes, under old towels in the linen closet. I found one envelope in a casserole dish in the back of the fridge and nearly dropped it because it was so absurd. It contained a bank letter and a note written in her shaky handwriting. The note told me to stop answering Marlene's questions. It also told me to keep copies of everything. That was the exact phrase she used, keep copies of everything. It sounded like Grandma, plain, unromantic, hard to argue with. A week later, she asked me to meet her at her attorney's office. She had not told Marlene. I drove her there in my car because hers had started making a noise that sounded like a loose fan blade. The lawyer was an older woman named Mrs. Harlan who had clearly known Grandma for years. She did not waste time. She asked Grandma a bunch of direct questions while I sat in the corner trying not to look like I was eavesdropping. I remember one answer in particular because Grandma leaned over the desk, pointed a finger at the file in front of her, and said she did not want anyone in the family using her confusion against her. Mrs. Harlan nodded like she had heard that exact sentence before from other old women who were tired of being underestimated. After that meeting, Grandma changed her paperwork again. I did not see all of it. I only saw enough to know it existed. New forms, new dates, a new envelope with my name on it. That envelope was the one I kept in my glove compartment for months without opening. She told me not to open it until after her funeral and only after I had checked the probate notices. I thought that was strange at the time. I thought she was being dramatic because the cancer had finally made her interested in the end game. I did not understand, yet, that she had already caught someone trying to rewrite her life while she was still alive. The first real theft happened 6 months before she died. At least it was the first one I proved. I noticed that one of her savings account balances had dipped more than it should have. Nothing huge at first, a few $100s, then a few thousand. I asked her about it, and she looked annoyed, which was her way of telling me she was ashamed. She said Marlene had helped her pay a couple of bills and maybe had made a mistake transferring money. That seemed believable enough for exactly one day. Then I found an email receipt for an online transfer to an account in Chloe's name. The date was during the week Marlene had taken Grandma to the cardiologist. That was the first moment I felt the floor tilt under me. I did not accuse anybody right away. I am not proud of how long that took. Part of me did not want the mess to be real. Part of me had spent my whole life assuming family ugliness was mostly noise, so I started keeping records. I photographed the bank pages. I made PDFs. I saved voicemail summaries. I wrote down every time Marlene offered to take Grandma somewhere alone. I asked Grandma a lot of innocent-sounding questions about what had happened while I was at work. She answered enough to let me know she was starting to suspect something too. It turned out Marlene had been quietly pushing for power of attorney. She framed it like love. She said she was the practical one, the one who knew how to handle adult responsibilities, the one who could make medical decisions if Grandma got worse. Grandma told me later that Marlene had also kept saying I was too busy and too emotionally involved. That was funny in the darkest possible way because the only reason I looked emotionally involved was that I actually showed up. Grandma refused the power of attorney request. Marlene acted offended for a while, then went back to pretending nothing had happened. The next month, one of the original estate papers vanished from the filing cabinet. I knew because I had been checking the folder weekly. At first, I thought I had misplaced it. I tore apart the kitchen, the bedroom drawers, the office shelves, and the trunk in the hall closet. Nothing. Then Grandma, with that expression she used when she had decided the truth was uglier than she wanted, told me Marlene had come by while I was at the pharmacy. That was the second real sign. Not a dramatic sign. Not a movie sign, just a small sentence from an old woman who had finally accepted that someone she loved was robbing her in plain sight. I told Mrs. Harlan. That was the turning point. The lawyer did not panic. She got methodical. She asked me for copies of the bank records, the transfer screenshots, and the missing paperwork list. She told me to keep my mouth shut around the family until she reviewed everything. She also told me to stop leaving important papers where anyone else could touch them. Grandma laughed at that. I did not. I started using a fireproof lockbox in my bedroom closet. That lockbox eventually held every bill, every statement, and every note Grandma wanted preserved. It also held the envelope she made me promise not to open. The last 3 months were the hardest. Grandma got weaker. Marlene got nicer. That is always how it works when people realize time is turning against them. She brought fruit. She asked if Grandma needed blankets. She started calling me by name in a softer voice. She even offered to sit with Grandma overnight so I could get a full sleep. I said no. I told myself I was being practical. In reality, I did not trust her with a paperclip. Chloe mostly stayed out of it. That should have made me less suspicious, but it actually made me more suspicious. Quiet people in families like ours often know exactly where the bodies are buried. They just don't like getting their shoes dirty. A few weeks before Grandma died, I came home from work early and found Marlene in the front hall with a box of old photos. She said she was helping sort memories. I remember that phrase because it felt rehearsed. Inside the box were pictures from before I was born. There were also several envelopes from Grandma's desk, including the one that should not have been there. I asked her what she was doing. She said she was trying to help because nobody else had time. I took the box from her and opened it right there. 2 of the envelopes were empty. One had a bent corner where a document had clearly been removed. She acted offended that I had the nerve to question her. I did not accuse her of theft. I was still too polite. I told her to leave. She did, but not before saying something that stuck with me. She said Grandma was confused and I was too close to see it. That line was so irritatingly perfect that I remember standing in the doorway after she left and feeling sick. It was not just the lie, it was how familiar it sounded. People say that kind of thing when they want to poison trust without leaving a fingerprint. From then on, I assumed anything important could disappear. That was how I ended up checking every drawer and every folder in the house like some paranoid maintenance man. A week before the funeral, Grandma asked me to bring her the black envelope from the lockbox. I thought she wanted to revise something else. Instead, she told me that if anything happened before Mrs. Harlan finished the final filing, I was to keep it safe and not let Marlene see it. She was too tired to explain all of it, but she made me repeat back the instructions twice. That was the last fully clear conversation I had with her. She died 4 days later while I was making coffee in the kitchen. By the time I got to her room, she was gone. Even now, I cannot think about that morning too long without getting angry at the randomness of it. There was no grand final speech, no last dramatic request, just a quiet death, a still room, and a sink full of dishes I had been meaning to wash. The funeral was small. The people who truly cared came early. The people who wanted to be seen came late. Marlene moved through the entire day like she was hosting instead of grieving. She accepted condolences with the same solemn face she used at church. Chloe cried in the bathroom twice and acted like she was holding everything together the rest of the time. I mostly floated through it. I shook hands. I made sure the flowers got into the car. I answered questions about food and parking and whether Grandma had already prepaid the cemetery bill. I did not have the energy for anger yet. That came later. The real fight started the next morning when Marlene came over with the folder. She had already called 2 relatives and told them there would be an informal family meeting about the estate. She framed it as an efficient thing. I understood immediately that she wanted the setting before the attorney did. She wanted to control the first version of the story. That is the oldest trick in families. Say it first, say it loud. Say it with enough confidence and half the room will nod because they do not want to go digging for truth. Mrs. Harlan had not yet filed the final probate packet, but she had already called me and told me to wait for notice before doing anything official. I did. Marlene clearly hated that I was not giving her an emotional reaction she could use, so she came to the house with the original will in her folder and a confidence she had probably polished in front of the mirror. She started talking about Grandma's wishes. She said Grandma had wanted Chloe to have the house because Chloe had always been the one who made time for her. That was a lie so lazy it almost made me laugh. Chloe had made time for maybe 6 lunches in 3 years. I had made time for hundreds of meals, appointments, prescription runs, and nights on the couch in case Grandma needed me. Then Marlene said Grandma had explained everything before she died. She said everybody knew my place in the family. She said it like she was putting me back where she believed I belonged. That is when I finally understood what she thought she had. She believed the original will was enough, or maybe she believed the missing pages and missing forms were enough. Either way, she was mistaken. The original will she waved around was old, very old. It predated Grandma's final round of changes. It also predated the bank transfer records, the missing signatures, and the attorney meeting I had helped arrange. Marlene had clearly convinced herself that if she controlled the paperwork, she controlled the outcome. That sort of thing works on people who never read the paperwork. It does not work on someone like me. I had spent the last year scanning documents because I had learned not to trust memory in a house this full of selfishness. Every page mattered, every date mattered, every envelope mattered, and the most important envelope was still in my glove compartment. I remember the moment I went to get it. I stood up from the table while Marlene was still talking and walked out without saying anything. Nobody followed me at first because they all assumed I was leaving to cool off. I went to my car, opened the glove compartment, and took out the black envelope Grandma had told me not to lose. The paper felt too light for the amount of trouble inside it. When I came back in, Marlene was still holding the original will like it was a victory banner. That was when I threw it across the table. Not hard enough to be theatrical, hard enough to make her stop talking. Then I told her to open the last envelope. The last envelope was not some magical secret. It was better than that. It was a clean, legal dated packet from Mrs. Harlan. Inside was the final will, the codicil, the letter from Grandma, and a cover page explaining exactly why the old documents were no longer valid. There was also a copy of a notarized statement from the hospice nurse, who witnessed Grandma signing the final changes. And there was one more thing, a bank letter. It showed that the suspicious transfers had been flagged after the attorney contacted the fraud department. The account access history had already been preserved. The timestamps lined up with the days Marlene claimed she had been helping Grandma privately. They lined up too well. That was the part that made the room go cold. The final will was simple. Grandma left the house to me, not because I was her favorite, not because I had begged, because I had been living there, maintaining it, paying the utilities she could no longer manage, and taking care of her through the worst part of her illness. She left a modest education fund to Chloe, not the whole estate, not the house, not the savings Marlene had been bragging about, just enough to be fair and not enough to satisfy greed. The rest would be settled through probate after debts and the missing funds were reviewed. Grandma's letter was the part that hit hardest. She had written it in her own voice, blunt and tired and completely done with being pushed around. She said she knew Marlene had been filtering information. She said she knew about the money. She said she knew someone had been trying to make her feel helpless so she would sign faster. She said she was not helpless. She said she had been waiting until the paperwork was right. That letter was the whole story in a few paragraphs. Not dramatic, not polished. Just a woman who had spent her final months being underestimated by people who thought age meant softness. Nobody at the table spoke for a few seconds. Then Chloe started crying for real. Not pretty crying. The kind where your face collapses because you cannot keep pretending you are only observing. Marlene looked down at the pages and I watched her understand, line by line, that the floor had vanished under her. Her eyes moved too fast. She flipped through the will once, then again. Then she tried to speak, but it came out flat and thin. She claimed Grandma must have changed her mind because I had manipulated her. That was the first accusation. Then she said the hospice nurse must have been mistaken. That was the second. Then she said the bank letter was just about a routine review. That one was almost funny. I had the transfer records already. I put those copies on the table too. That was when her face really changed. The thing about keeping records is that truth gets very boring and very dangerous when it is organized. I had dates. I had screenshots. I had a spreadsheet with amounts and withdrawal times. I had copies of text messages where Marlene offered to handle bills and then claimed later that Grandma had asked for cash. I had a photo of the missing estate page from the first folder before it vanished. I had enough to make her panic without raising my voice. She did not expect me to be prepared. That was the mistake she made. She thought grief meant disorganization. She thought silence meant ignorance. She thought I would be too emotional to have receipts. Instead, I had built a paper trail while she was busy performing concern. Marlene tried to pivot. She said Chloe had always been the one Grandma trusted. Chloe, still crying, said nothing. That silence told me more than any argument could have. She knew something was wrong. Maybe not everything. Maybe not enough, but she knew. The original will on the table suddenly looked ridiculous. It was an old paper now, not a weapon. I watched Marlene realize that too. She had used it like a threat because it was the oldest thing she could find. The last envelope made that impossible. Mrs. Harlan had made copies of the final packet with the right dates and signatures. Grandma had done exactly what she needed to do before she died. The room changed after that. You could feel the family rearranging itself in real time. Ray stopped pretending not to be interested. Lee put her phone down. Chloe stared at Marlene like she was seeing a stranger. Marlene asked if I had hidden the envelope from her. That was almost insulting in its simplicity. I told her no. I told her Grandma had hidden it from her. That was when the real damage started, because she could fight me. She could not fight the date on the notarization. She could not fight the hospice nurse. She could not fight the bank's fraud review. She could not fight Grandma's own handwriting saying she was not confused and did not need Marlene speaking for her. She especially could not fight the fact that the final filing had already been prepared before Grandma died. Her face went through about 3 different emotions in 10 seconds. Shock, then anger, then that brittle smile people wear when they are trying not to fall apart in front of witnesses. She told me I had no idea how things worked. That was her last real attempt at power. I told her I had a pretty good idea, considering I had been the one keeping the house alive while she was keeping score. That line landed harder than I expected, not because I said it cleverly, because it was true. I had spent a year remembering every utility bill, every prescription, every doctor bill, every grocery run, every repair, every time Grandma forgot to eat until I put food in front of her. Marlene had spent that same year talking about what she deserved. The difference mattered. When she saw the bank letter, she finally understood that this was not just an inheritance issue anymore. It was a paper trail, the kind that makes lawyers attentive and banks nervous. Mrs. Harlan had already sent the documents to probate court. The fraud review was underway. If any of the transfers were unauthorized, they could be reversed. If any signatures had been pressured or altered, the estate could challenge them. And if Marlene had taken money under the excuse of helping, she was going to have to explain every single dollar. That was the moment she stopped looking smug. She did not apologize. People like that rarely do. She started bargaining instead. She said maybe there had been misunderstandings. She said maybe Grandma had wanted things handled privately. She said maybe we could all work this out like family. I had heard that sentence before in different forms from different people. It always means someone wants a private deal because public facts are unkind to them. I told her no, not loudly, just clearly. No private deal, no rewriting, no pretending the papers did not say what they said. That was enough. She looked around the table for help and found none. Lee looked uncomfortable. Ray looked relieved. Chloe looked like she might be sick. I understood her reaction better than I wanted to. She had probably been told a softer version of the truth for months, maybe years. Maybe she had believed she was protected when she was really being positioned. That is a hard thing to realize about your own mother. Marlene left before the conversation could get any uglier. She took the folder with her, though it did not matter much by then because I had already made copies and the attorney had the originals. The house felt different after she walked out, not peaceful, just less fake. I sat at the table long after everyone else had drifted into the kitchen or out to the porch. I kept looking at the last envelope as if it might still somehow change. It did not. It had already done its job. The next week was mostly phone calls and waiting. That is the part people do not talk about when they imagine family betrayal finally being exposed. It is not all dramatic confrontation. A lot of it is sitting by a phone and answering questions from lawyers and bank investigators while your coffee gets cold. Mrs. Harlan walked me through the probate timeline. She explained what had to be filed, what could be contested, and what the bank would need to release. She also told me to stop engaging Marlene directly, unless necessary. That was easy advice to follow once Marlene started sending texts that alternated between denial, guilt, and fake concern. She said Grandma had been confused. Then she said I was using grief to punish her. Then she said Chloe deserved fairness. Then she said the family would never forgive me if I dragged this through court. I saved all of it, every message, every voicemail, every weird late-night call. I did not answer most of them. That made her angrier. The more she lost control, the more mistakes she made. She started calling relatives and telling them I had manipulated Grandma into changing the will at the last minute. That might have worked if Grandma had not left behind a letter describing exactly why she changed it and exactly what she had seen. It also might have worked if the bank had not frozen part of the account pending review. And it definitely would not have worked once Mrs. Harlan requested the hospice records. Those records confirmed Grandma was alert when she signed the final documents. That mattered more than anything Marlene said. You cannot argue someone out of a dated signature. You cannot bluff a notary and a nurse and a bank investigator all at once. The first person in the family to call and apologize was my Uncle Ray. He admitted he had not believed Marlene entirely, but he also admitted he had not wanted to get involved. I did not blame him. Most people choose peace over truth until truth kicks the door in. Lee apologized too in her awkward way and said she had seen Marlene removing papers from Grandma's desk once, but had assumed it was nothing. That line bothered me because it told me just how many people had seen bits and pieces and decided not to connect them. That is how manipulation survives, not because it is brilliant, because everybody thinks somebody else will deal with it. Chloe took the longest to call. When she finally did, she sounded smaller than I had ever heard her. She said she had not known about the transfers. She said she had thought the house talk was just Marlene being sentimental. She said she felt sick that she had repeated some of Marlene's claims without checking them. I believed her, not because I thought she was blameless, because the shame in her voice sounded real. She had been benefiting from a lie, but benefit and authorship are not the same thing. That distinction mattered to me even when I was furious. She told me she wanted to sit down and go through everything honestly. I said fine, and I meant it, because at that point I was no longer fighting to punish anybody. I was fighting to make sure Grandma's actual wishes got respected. 2 days later, Chloe came to the house alone. She looked like she had not slept. We sat in the kitchen with the envelope copies spread between us. I showed her the bank records. I showed her the final will. I showed her the letter where Grandma explained what she had changed and why. Chloe cried again, but this time she was quiet about it. She admitted Marlene had kept telling her the family was finally making it right after years of Grandma favoring me. That line made me breathe out through my nose because it was exactly the kind of twisted story Marlene would tell. Make the child feel owed. Make the other person feel guilty. Keep everybody emotional enough to stop checking the facts. Chloe also told me something that made the whole thing even uglier. She said Marlene had asked her to sign a loose sheet of paper weeks earlier, claiming it was just for sorting sentimental items. Chloe had not signed it, thankfully, but she had seen Marlene carrying a notary folder around the same time. That matched the timeline Mrs. Harlan had already suspected. It was not enough for a criminal case on its own, but it was enough to show the pattern. Marlene was trying to create a paper version of reality that did not exist. That is where the story could have turned into a court battle for years. It almost did. Instead, once the fraud review started and the final will was confirmed, her position collapsed faster than she expected. The bank denied the most suspicious transfers pending restitution review. The attorney warned her not to remove anything else from the house. Mrs. Harlan filed a formal objection to any claim that Grandma had lacked capacity. And when Marlene realized that the family was no longer going to cover for her, she finally made one mistake too many. She sent an email to the wrong person. In it, she admitted she had been handling Grandma's money because the old woman was too tired to keep track. That sentence was the end of her bluff. It was the kind of thing people say when they have convinced themselves they were helping. It was also exactly the sort of line a lawyer loves to see in writing. Mrs. Harlan forwarded it to the probate file. After that, Marlene stopped being confident. She started being practical in the desperate way cornered people become practical. She wanted a compromise. She wanted to avoid court. She wanted to keep things private. I wanted truth on the record. Those two goals were never going to meet. The house stayed in my name through the estate process, subject to the usual waiting period and debts. I had to cover a couple of utility costs in the meantime, which was annoying but manageable. Grandma had already set aside enough to keep the place from slipping under me while probate moved. That was another thing Marlene had not counted on. Grandma had prepared for the boring part, not the emotional part, the paperwork part, the part where you need enough cash on hand to stop a house from becoming a mess while the courts do their slow thing. I spent the next few months doing exactly what Grandma would have done. I paid what had to be paid. I cleaned what had to be cleaned. I sorted the rest. I found old recipe cards in a cookbook. I found a drawer full of batteries. I found every unpaid utility receipt she had clipped and labeled. That woman had been fighting decline like a general. It made me miss her in a sharper way than the funeral had. Because grief was one thing, discovering how hard she had worked to protect me was another. The final probate hearing was anticlimactic in the way real legal outcomes often are. There was no thunder, no dramatic collapse. Just a stack of documents, a few objections, and a judge who seemed tired of people pretending confusion was the same as invalidity. The final will stood. The bank issues were resolved enough to force restitution negotiations. The attorney confirmed the original will had been superseded. Marlene's claim that the papers had been swapped or manipulated did not survive the evidence. Not because I was clever in court, because Grandma had left a trail that could not be wished away. That was the real victory, not me winning an argument, me refusing to be rushed into one. After the hearing, Marlene did not talk to me for weeks. Then she left one voicemail that was half apology and half complaint. She said she had been trying to protect Chloe. She said she had only wanted things to be fair. She said Grandma should have been clearer. That last part made me actually laugh, which felt mean and also justified. Grandma had been clear. Marlene had just spent years refusing to hear anything that did not flatter her plans. I did not call back, not out of cruelty, out of exhaustion. There was nothing left to negotiate. Chloe and I eventually reached a workable place. She did not come after the house. She did not try to defend her mother once she saw the records. She admitted she had been embarrassed by how much of her life had been built on assumptions other people fed her. I told her I understood that better than she probably thought. That was true. I had spent years assuming Marlene's behavior was just annoying family stuff. I had underestimated her too. The difference was that Grandma had trained me without meaning to keep receipts. That habit saved me. Months later, after the dust settled, I walked through the house with one of those banker boxes full of old papers and realized I was finally able to breathe in it again. Not because everything was healed. It was not. Family fights leave cracks, some of them never fully close. But the house was mine now in the way Grandma intended, and that mattered. I repaired the leak under the sink. I had the porch steps fixed. I replaced the broken hallway light Marlene had always promised to handle and never did. I framed one of Grandma's old kitchen notes and hung it inside the pantry because it made me smile. Chloe came by once with a bag of groceries and stood in the doorway looking uncomfortable. She said she wanted to help with some of the cleaning. We spent an afternoon sorting old photo albums. It was not emotional in the movie sense. It was quieter than that. Still, it felt honest. The weirdest part was how ordinary life became once the drama ended. I still had to go to work. I still had to shop for groceries. I still had to pay the property tax bill and answer contractor calls. But the difference was that every task now felt like maintenance of something real instead of temporary. I was not waiting to be displaced anymore. I was not bracing for the next lie. Grandma's letter stayed in my desk drawer for a long time. I read it more than once. Not because I wanted to relive the pain, because I wanted to remember how calm she had been while everyone else was busy performing. She had not screamed. She had not begged. She had made a plan. That is what saved me from getting trapped in Marlene's version of events. I kept copies. I checked dates. I let the facts do the work. The last time I saw Marlene in person was at a cousin's baby shower 8 months later. She acted like we were just distant relatives, instead of people who had nearly gone to war over Grandma's estate. She avoided me at first, then tried a stiff little nod when she realized there was nowhere to hide. I nodded back. No scene, no victory speech, no revenge, just enough politeness to make it clear I was not afraid of her anymore. That was the actual payoff, not the house, not even the money. It was the fact that she could no longer push me into doubt by speaking loudly enough. I knew what happened. I had the paperwork. I had the bank records. I had Grandma's handwriting. And I had the patience to wait until the truth could speak for itself. People still ask, in that indirect family way, whether I felt bad for how it ended. Honestly, yes. I felt bad for Grandma having to defend her own wishes from her own daughter. I felt bad for Chloe getting pulled into a lie she did not build. I felt bad for the fact that families can turn paperwork into warfare the second someone dies. But I do not feel bad about not giving Marlene the fight she wanted. She wanted a loud argument she could twist. She wanted me emotional and sloppy. Instead, I stayed calm, kept records, and let the last envelope do what Grandma had designed it to do. It exposed every lie. It made the original will irrelevant. It showed exactly who had been manipulating whom, and in the end, that was enough. The house still has Grandma's handwriting in a few places, a grocery list taped inside a cabinet, a reminder note on the thermostat, a recipe card with grease stains on the corner. I leave them there, not as some dramatic memorial, just because they are hers. And because after everything Marlene tried to steal, it feels good to keep the small things exactly where they belong.